Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Carroll Connection. I am your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. I did want to take a chance to shout out last week's episode 197, with Alina Turkop, who came on the podcast to talk about being a holistic wellness guide. Couldn't think of the phrasing, but she came on the podcast, talked about that, how she got into that journey, talked about competitive dancing, being a choreographer, and even directing some musicals as well. And it was just a really great podcast. We talked a lot of great things and dove into a lot of great topics. So you can check that out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you'd like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search the Carroll Connection or at Jared M. Carroll, and it should pop up for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at the Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. That also brings me to another great point. I'll be adding this to the podcast going forward, but to make an announcement on the podcast, as you might have seen on my Facebook or my Instagram, I announced the release of my debut book, The 5 Pillars to Create a Meaningful Life. And I'm really excited about this book. I've put a lot of time and effort into this. I mentioned it throughout the podcast. It's like my secret project. And I'll go into more detail about this book on my birthday reflection that's coming up in a few weeks that I do every year. And I'll dive into that a little bit more. But you can buy the book only on Amazon. I'll be putting the link in the description of every episode going forward, so you can get it there. It's also on my personal Instagram at Jared M. Carroll, and it's on my Facebook as well. So please purchase the book. Please review the book, and I really appreciate any support that I can get for that. It would mean the world to me. But that brings me back to the podcast in today's episode 198 with Matt Sweeney.
What's going on, man? I'm excited to be here.
Happy to have you on the podcast. And like I was telling you, like kind of off podcast, like I found you through Instagram, just like searching for Rhode Island podcasts, and you came up and reached out. And we booked this like months ago. So like I'm really excited that we were able to do that and have this on the schedule. We had a great pre-interview, just kind of explaining a little bit of myself. And now I'm really excited to learn about you and your life story. So how I like to open every podcast is just who you are and what you're doing currently.
Totally. Yeah, and I appreciate you reaching out. I'm glad you found me. I guess that means I'm doing something semi right. We're building some traction, so happy to hear that. Yeah, right now I'm running my own podcast, the Rhody Strength Podcast, interviewing people in the fitness world, whether they're coaches, people in the health world like physical therapists, chiropractors, or just people who are athletes. So keeping it pretty local and talking off podcast with you really resonated with me, that you're trying to keep it local. Everybody has their own story. Doesn't need to be a big major guest to have like a really impactful podcast. So I definitely I feel like the same vein of kind of what you're doing, which is really cool. So I'm happy to be on. I also have drank a lot of coffee today, so on purpose, because I'm excited to kind of like get into this. There was a podcast episode I listened to from a while ago. This Joe Rogan and Kelly Starrett, who is a physical therapist, a role model, I should say, for a lot of PTs, including myself, has written the Supple Leopard book, which talks about a lot of mobility techniques. But he was on a podcast with Joe Rogan, and he said afterwards, he was like, "Yeah, I had like 4 shots of espresso. I was like shooting laser beams out of my eyes like a shark." I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go for that today. I'm gonna see how that goes. So yeah, so I run a podcast. I've been having a lot of fun with it. I've been doing that since 2021, I believe. So I'm 3 years in, July 2021. I've recorded and posted 91 episodes, but I also have quite a few that have been recorded but not posted yet. I'm a little slow on the editing side. If you have any tips for me, I would definitely appreciate that. So I'm doing that kind of as its own thing, side bubble, side hustle, side hobby, whatever you want to call it, having fun with it. My main gig is physical therapy, so I am working out of a gym in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, called Bullfrog Fit. Not too far from here. It took me about 30 minutes to get here from Bullfrog. And I have another location I'm working out of a gym called Rhody Strength in Providence, Rhode Island. So I drive 195 quite often, getting back and forth between those two. The Washington Bridge has made that slightly more difficult, but we're getting through it. Hopefully when they fix it, it doesn't fall down. That will be a problem for me because I don't have to go around through Newport or Pawtucket. So hopefully they do a good job fixing that. But so I work the physical therapy business. I'm a solo practitioner, so it's just me and my admin right now, Portia, who's, if you call my phone number, she'll answer. She's been crushing it. She's also a physical therapist, PT assistant, living down in Miami right now, but been really, really helpful with the business. So doing that, I specialize in one-on-one care with people, with athletes mostly, but I treat everybody. I work with everybody. Um, Aside from that, I'm living in Providence. Shout out to my wife Liz. We're living there together. Moved in with her in 2020. Was a 2-week lockdown move in that I never left. So that was good. And yeah, I think I covered most of the bases. Podcast, physical therapist. I coach some group training classes as well, so I still keep that fitness side of me, whether it's CrossFit or I do kind of like circuit training as well.
Perfect. And
Yeah.
we'll dive into the progression of how you got into these careers throughout the podcast. And yeah, I could definitely offer some advice on doing this. I've been, like I said, off podcast. I've been doing it almost 5 years, just about there, and almost at 200. Like I've got it planned out. Barring any cancellations, that's is what it is. But really happy that you've been able to do your podcast and sustain it too. That's like a huge thing, is being able to like get that when you actually post and release episode 100, you're gonna feel really proud of yourself, and you should feel proud of yourself because it is an accomplishment to record all the episodes, edit all those episodes. Like not everyone notices or appreciates the amount of time that goes into doing a podcast and all the editing that you have to do, especially when you're the host and producer and editor and you have to post it on social media to
Yeah.
generate traction. So it's like I always resonate really, like I resonate a lot, I should say, with other podcasters because you get the struggle, like the stupid audio things, all the technology, social media, like there's a lot that goes into it, not everyone notices.
Yeah. Right when I came in, I'm like, oh, that's a great setup. You get the Rodecaster, nice mics, everything. Comparing different platform software we use. So no, I was excited to come and meet you today on that. Yeah, the podcast has been fun. It's a labor of love, as I call it. People ask me like, oh, is it a lot of work? I'm like, it's too much work. I should not be spending this so much time on it, but I want to keep it rolling. I've been having fun with it. It's not something I see myself stopping, which I'm glad you brought that up because it is one of those things. I forget, you might know the data on this, but the average podcast only lasts like, I want to say less than 10 episodes.
Yeah, that was the number that I always ran with in the beginning.
Yeah, it's not many. So when I got into this from the start, not to skip ahead at all, but like it was something that inspired me, something I had been a consumer of podcasts for a while and wanted to do something along those lines. And as a side project for the business, I thought it was mutually beneficial for the business as well, for being a fitness podcast in the physical therapy business. But so everything would look like, hey, let's go and do this thing. And I was at the time, I've said this in person to a lot of people, but I've never said it on the podcast. Obviously, this is my first podcast as a guest being on. I think I may have said this in the pod. Haven't said it either way. There was a guest that I had reached out to, who's a coach at a barbell club, and was early on in my podcast game. I was maybe like episode 3 or 4, and I didn't know at the time, but he actually also was doing a podcast back in the day. I don't think he does it anymore, but he recorded a ton of episodes, and I asked him to be a guest, and he's like, and I don't know if you've had a similar experience to this, but he said, wait till you get to 30 episodes, then ask me. I'm like, okay. He kind of wanted to see if I had like maybe the grit or the consistency to like, if it was just going to be a quick, like, I'm not going to, a couple episodes in, then I'm going to burn out, or if I was like actually going to continue doing it. So I did. I made it to 30, had him on, and he was telling me that's basically why he was saying that to me. Like, he wanted to see if I could do it. So
it's nice to have actually someone push you a little bit too. I actually did that. I did that to one of my friends. When he created a podcast after he came on episode 50, and then really fell in love with like kind of what I was doing and wanted to like do it himself.
Yeah.
He hasn't posted in like a year at this point. But he has a ton of episodes out there.
Yeah.
But I told him when he first started, he was just recording them, but I was like, if you're not putting it on Apple or Spotify, I'm not coming to do your podcast.
Yeah.
Like once you're on that, then I'll come do your podcast.
Sure.
And he's like, that helped me achieve that and push towards that.
Need a little push.
Sometimes you do need that push. And like, it's nice to have sometimes that outside kind of hold you accountable a little bit for that. And we'll
Yeah.
get into the podcast stuff. I don't want to like jump too
Yeah,
far because I could go on for
Oh,
hours. This whole
man.
podcast can turn into a podcast about a podcast.
About podcasting.
Yeah, I get my friend who's produced a lot. He always hates when all of us podcasters get together and talk about podcasting. He's like, "Come on, guys, it's not like a podcast episode."
I want to
about
make one more
podcasting."
point on that actually too,
Yeah.
because like you got into it before it blew up. If you've been doing it for 5 years, you got into it before COVID.
Yeah, right before COVID.
So like it really blew up. Like I was in the bubble of where it blew up, of like right after COVID. And it almost I almost hesitate to tell people I do a podcast because to me it almost seems like no, I think probably not so much anymore in 2024, but in the previous like 2-3 years, everybody they were popping up and popping up and popping up. And there is like a somewhat of a negative connotation with like you see like jokes or memes being made like, oh, just a couple bros having a podcast, like, you know, like
Straight white males having
Right,
podcasts. It's
right,
like
right.
stereotype.
right. So I was almost like hesitant to tell people about it because I'm like, oh, don't put me in a box with all these other people that are doing it, because like as like and I know you're different as well, like there's a different purpose and different like belief system yeah, there's different purpose behind it. So like I wanted to make that point too, because like it's almost like a trending thing. I don't think not so much anymore in 2024. I think it's kind of like it's not trending as much anymore to like a bunch of bros make a podcast type of thing. But for a while it was. So is I like that things have kind of like almost professionalized a little bit in the podcast space. But
I mean, they're still
yeah.
out there. There's still plenty of those podcasts out there, and
Yeah,
there's always a
yeah.
niche for them. There's always a
For
need
sure,
for
sure.
that style out there. But I've always been big on. I'm big on breaking down stereotypes. Like,
Sure.
don't be the if you don't like a certain stereotype, don't be that. Like,
Yeah.
you have a choice to not be that. Whether people are
Totally.
going to put you in that box or not, that's their prerogative and that's what they're going to do. But you don't have to be that. You could be what
Exactly.
you want to be as a person, and you can only control that. So
Right.
when I look at the podcast, like I know that stereotype exists about, especially white guys having a podcast. So I was like, I don't want to be that. So like
Right.
that's why I actively try to not make it like that either. And like I
Definitely.
try to go a different route, and I kind of took a page of the Joe Rogan playbook, and I
Yeah.
like the way when I look at his podcast, to me that's traditional podcasting. People
Totally.
are just sitting down, no fancy editing. It's just cameras
Yeah.
and microphones and people just talking.
Totally.
That to me has always been the traditional model, and that's kind of where I've derived it from. Even the Carroll connection, the Joe Rogan experience, there was some
Yeah.
influence there. There's a
Totally.
backstory
Totally.
around that, but
Yeah.
I'll save that for the later half. But to flash back a little bit,
Yeah.
and we'll get into this whole aspect later. But I like to start with the family dynamic.
Sure.
So it's whatever you're comfortable with. I'll let you
Yeah.
dive into that.
Yeah, so starting with basically I live I guess family dynamic currently, or kind of
Starting up more like younger, like your
Okay, yeah.
parents and grandparents, if
so
whatever it was.
I grew up in a small town called Ashby, Massachusetts. Also, side note, shout out my mom because I know she'll be at least one of the listeners for this. So Ashby, Massachusetts, we'll put that town on the map because nobody's ever heard of it. If they think they've heard of it, they probably have heard of Mashpee, which is a town on the Cape. Maybe you've heard of Mashpee before.
Yeah, I have.
Ashby is near Fitchburg, Leominster. If you haven't heard of those two towns, I broaden out to Worcester. If you haven't heard of that, we're in Massachusetts, so you have. But if you haven't heard of that, like from somewhere else, like all right. Yeah, but near Worcester. All right, kind of near Boston, not really. But anyway, it's a small town right on the border of New Hampshire. The closest store to us was in New Hampshire. Like, that's how close it was. One traffic light, like, small town, like, grew up. I had this conversation. This is a little bit off topic. Maybe not. Maybe it filters in. But I grew up in a time period. So I'm 33. And the time period I grew up was like when the internet was kind of like just becoming a thing, I guess. Like, we had dial up, but it wasn't really worth using. Like, we could get on like E-Bombs World. I don't know if you remember that website. It was kind of like the Chive or the Barstool Sports of today. Like, you could play these stupid little games. Like, that's that's about it. It was very, very bare minimal, and everything took forever to load, so we didn't really use it very much. So a lot of the stuff we did was like, I played a bunch of different sports. Went over friends' houses, rode bikes, like went outside. Like, as we got older, we loved to ride. Like, we had these little dirt bikes, 50cc dirt bikes. We'd like ride around in the woods and stuff like that. 4-wheelers, very much like a woodsy like childhood experience. And I almost am really thankful for that in that time period that I grew up, because I didn't have as much of that. Like, I mean, I didn't really have any social media until high school, or maybe middle school. MySpace came out, but I look at, not to sound like a boomer, but I look at kids these days, like growing up, like kids these days, and I'm like, damn, like they don't have that experience where like social media didn't exist. It's like it's a whole new generation. It's a whole new like life for people growing up now, and you kind of have to learn and adapt to that. And there's pros and cons to it, but it's just different. Like, you'll never be able to experience like what it was like before that. So it's really interesting. I was talking to somebody about that recently, so I want to put that in. But yeah, grew up small town. Mom and dad, great family. Very strict, very religious. Church every Sunday. Um, and so we'll still go, for holidays and stuff when I'm back home, which is good. Grandparents lived 5 minutes away. My aunt and uncle lived next door, so it was very, very, very tight knit family. Not as particularly large family, but tight knit, very close. I had other relatives from my dad's side who are also in Massachusetts. Grandparents were in New York, Maine, just a little further away, so we didn't see them as much. But the immediate family on my mom's side was really close, so we saw them a lot. One brother, we were super close growing up. Didn't play. Well, we played some of the same sports, but he got more into high school. He got more into football, so he played a lot of football. Was really good at it. And then jumping ahead, I introduced him to jujitsu, which I don't do as much anymore, and he kind of took that off and ran with it, and became a much, much, much better jujitsu player than I. But yeah, it was really good. I would say like everybody has their like troubles or struggles, but I would say I'm pretty lucky in that, like, didn't have too many like home issues. Like when I look at friends, other people like growing up, like was pretty lucky from a family dynamic, like really, really good family. Um, and it's interesting. I had a friend I grew up with who had a little more issues from a family standpoint, and we were driving one day. Let me backtrack for a second. That's not to say we didn't get in trouble, because we definitely got in trouble a lot. Little bit of drinking, a little bit of partying, a little bit of smoking weed. Parents weren't super happy with that, so there was definitely some trouble to be made. But I was so fast forward a little bit. I was talking with a friend. We were driving somewhere one time, I think to get pizza or something like that. He goes, "Great kid, great guy." He said to me, he's like, it's crazy. We have two very different families growing up. Like, my parents, his parents, family dynamic. He goes, "We both turned out all right." I'm like, "Yeah, we did." So I think I just wanted to put that in there as like don't let your family situation define you, because like you at the end of the day are in control. Not saying that those things don't affect you. So because you can see it go both ways. Perfect family and then have issues, or a tough family and be in a really great space. So but not to say that those don't affect you, and those don't impact you. Um, so yeah, I guess fast forward to high school, I guess would be the next
Yeah,
step.
let me go
Yeah.
off on
Go ahead. Yeah.
something, 'cause
Yeah.
we'll get into that. 'Cause I actually really resonated with the speak about social media and stuff like that as a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
Like, so I'll be 29 in November.
Sure.
So I was like almost like the next, like, I don't want to say generation like after you, because that's not the right word. Like 4 or 5 years, like right
Yeah.
after,
Yeah.
where I got most of Facebook, and like
Yeah.
I had a MySpace that my older brother created for me because
Nice.
I wasn't supposed to have it. Like, I didn't really use it, but he kind of like created it for me. I had like my own middle school picture, or I don't know if I was even in middle school at that point. I think I was. I think it was like maybe sixth grade or something like that. But it was me playing football, and like that was like my profile picture. But like I couldn't even sign into it, so it was like on his stuff and whatever. But I always think about that often. I talk about it on the podcast. It's like I really feel for these kids coming up, because all they know is social media, and it's
Yeah.
only progressively gotten worse, unfortunately. Where I
Sure.
think social media, and I want to say this, was created for good, not bad. I want to believe
Sure.
that it was meant to try to help people and make us feel more connected and have more opportunities. But obviously, when you let people have free will and free control, that
Yeah.
you're also going to have negatives. And a lot of the negatives really seeped into our habits and our behaviors, and they influence things. And social media and algorithms really dictate the way we view the certain things in the world and how they happen and our opinions. And it's sad to see that it's affecting the children growing up, where it's the common word is brain rot nowadays, where everyone's just chronically online saying random things. And I mean, we had the word like swag and shit back in the day where it was like that, but like the words that they use now and the access that they have to certain, I guess, conversations and topics and things online is kind of scary. I had a teacher on recently on the podcast, and she's teaching second grade, and she's like, "You wouldn't believe some of the things that they're saying. Like some of the things that they have access to is like honestly mind blowing. And like they'll be
Sure.
singing songs that I listened to as an adult, and it's like,
Whoa. Yeah.
Jesus, like this is kind of crazy
Yeah.
that's reaching them. And we're seeing that a lot of parents hand their kids iPhones or iPads, and
Yeah.
they aren't actively parenting all the time. And it's easy to
Sure.
say as someone who doesn't have a kid,
Of
like
course.
to not give them that when they're crying or they want it. It's like I can't speak negatively on that because I don't know that experience fully, but we can't sit here and also say that that doesn't impact them negatively, because it definitely does.
Mm.
But we grew up in a generation where we played outside. I rode bikes.
Yeah.
Like my neighbors would at least they live on the other side, and we would ride the bikes over there, build forts, play
Yeah.
football, play wiffle ball. Like it wasn't. It was like middle school when I started getting a cell phone, and then I remember one of the phones I got an LG Dare, and I could. It was like a touchscreen, and I could record with the camera and stuff, and we would make like random stupid videos. Like we had like a gorilla costume, and like they had like a Family Guy costume, and we just like tackle each other and make stupid videos, and like it was like early days of YouTube, so it was like slowly getting into it,
Sure.
but like we were still outside doing things where it wasn't like we're just making content.
Yeah.
It was just like us having fun fucking around. It's like, hey, we have this tool. Let's just like
Yeah.
record ourselves. And
You're
like,
right.
and it wasn't like a thing where now it's like these kids are like having like content pages. It's like, especially like looking about like young athletes. Like these dudes have like highlight reels and like
Yeah.
Instagrams and doing TikTok dances, and like they're trying to make brands. It's like like in my opinion, that's like the right thing if you're trying to go down that path nowadays.
Right.
Is like
Right.
if the earlier you start, the higher chance you have succeeding at something. But like at the same time, they're not getting the childhood that we had, and
Right.
it's kind of sad to see the real change in generation to generation where these kids are going with technology, and especially as AI comes into the picture.
Mm.
It's interesting to see where things are going to go, especially with the youth. Like
Yeah.
even in the classrooms, like they're going to be using that in the classrooms. There's no way around that. Like chat
No.
GPT and all this stuff to write
Yeah.
essays and stuff in college. Like
Yeah.
I remember Chegg and stuff. We were using Chegg in college, and Quizlet. Like
Yeah.
all the stuff were online. Like you really didn't have to study. Like
Yeah.
like it wasn't like there were. I remember high school. They were like always like, yeah, the college is gonna be way every year was like next grade's gonna be way harder. It's gonna be way harder. And it got almost sometimes easier and easier the more I got
Sure.
access to social media and technology and the internet.
Yeah.
Like it was like that weird phase where it's like we knew what social media and the internet was, but like I don't think the people above us knew how to use it and how to prevent
Mm.
like the kids from using it and advancing as fast as we have.
Sure.
So it's like it's weird. I think I always say we grew up in the perfect time with it because we
Yeah.
got to live a little bit, and we grew with social media in the internet on top of that. It's definitely
Yeah.
interesting.
Which is wild to think about that. Like we grew as the internet grew. It's like insane.
Like the last generation to experience what life was like before
Before the internet.
the internet was really taking over. And,
Insane.
like there
Yeah.
wasn't social media. We didn't have that. Like there was
Yeah.
internet. There was I remember like AIM and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Like
there was a post the other day that someone for some reason recycled like, what was your AIM screen name? I'm like, oh, that's crazy. And I reposted it. That's funny you bring that up. But yeah, that was just basically just like texting through your computer.
yeah. I just remember that the away messages were always so like sad or something. Someone's like away and they can't talk to their boyfriend or girlfriend. It's
Yeah.
like, I miss so and so, and then like the heart with the slash through and the 3 and like sad faces, and because there wasn't emojis either. It's just
There's some interesting like G2G, like it was like
Yeah,
gotta
gotta
go. Like we don't. That's an interesting like.
that one fell out. Yeah, that
nobody
used to
uses
be
that.
like the thing to say.
I wonder if it's because like when you text, like you're actually not going anywhere because you just put your phone in your pocket. When you
Mm.
have to go from your computer, you have to literally walk away from it. Yeah, that's interesting. I just had
Yeah,
just thought about
yeah,
that.
that actually is really true. Like
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it like that, where it's like that Yeah, you're always attached to it. So it's like
Yeah.
now you have to put your phone on do not disturb so no one messages you and
Or
they
like
just slam it and send it anyways.
or like TTYL. Nobody uses that one anymore. Talk to
Yeah,
you later. It's
no.
interesting how some of those acronyms haven't like they've just kind of been washed away.
It's kind of crazy, and I've never actually. That's actually a weird thing to think about that I've
Yeah.
never thought about. Like it's one of those
Yeah.
things. Like that was everything. Like
LOL
oh,
almost is getting like washed away.
I hate LOL. Like it's just it's so
Nobody.
passive aggressive to me now. Like I just
Oh, you know what? Yeah, it's used more in a passive aggressive stance versus anything else.
yeah, and
Yeah.
like I joke around with my girlfriend sometimes. She'll say LOL. I'm like, are you mad at me or something? Like, what did I do? Like, because like I'm so used. It's like using the laughing emoji or saying
Right.
haha or LMAO. Like,
Texting has become its own language.
yeah, like you could literally have tone in text message.
Yeah.
And like
the way you write something.
yeah, and people try to say that you don't. Like, I'm just texting. Like, you can
No,
write it a
there's-
certain way. Like, you could tell. Like,
Yeah.
if someone says K and it's not
K,
like your
period.
parents, like you're probably screwed. Like, it's just weird how technology just grows as time goes, but we had the chance to actually develop a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm
yeah,
really appreciative that
Yeah.
we've had that, and just the fact that you brought that up was like I wanted to like dive into a little bit of that
Totally.
because I thought that was super interesting.
Totally.
Continuing with it though,
Yeah.
I would like for you to get into that high school phase and then
Yeah.
going towards did you go to college or did you not go to college?
Totally. Yeah. So high school is when I really I played soccer as a youth. Like I feel like everybody does. I feel like this could just be me looking at it biased. Like I feel like I kind of had a gift with soccer, and I probably should have kept going with it because I was always a person to score all the goals. But I was also like 13, so I stopped when I was all my friends started playing ice hockey. And if you've never played ice hockey, 13 is very old to start playing ice hockey. Like to learn how to skate when everybody's like starting to check each other. So I had a very steep learning curve with that. I do love the sport of ice hockey. I still play, like pick up. My brother plays. I have a bunch of friends back home that play. But I was definitely a little behind, at least initially, and then I caught up. But I played ice hockey in high school for the first year. And then they're making the cuts to JV and varsity. I was just like, I just didn't make it after that. So I kind of had to expand what I was doing for sports a little bit. I still played a little bit of club ice hockey, men's league stuff, but for high school I ended up doing a little bit of I did wrestling for one semester. And this was kind of like my ADD phase of sports where I kind of tried a little bit of everything. Wrestling was at the time I honestly didn't not really like it because it's really hard. I did crew like rowing because I went to school at St. John's High School. I should mention that in Shrewsbury. So it's right on the Quinsigamon River. So we had the crew boats and rowing up and down. Private, all boys high school. Go to class with a blazer on during the winter months and just a regular tie during the summer months. And they were strict with that. If you had one of your buttons undone, detention. If you didn't tuck your shirt in, detention. They were just like handing detentions out like crazy, just to kind of like making it like be like, hey, like this is the standard, and you have to adhere to the standard. If your hair starts growing over your ears a little bit, detention. Like everything needs to be like top notch. I wasn't in detention a lot. I don't know, a lot of kids were. I kind of was like, all right, I'll do it. I'll do the work. But every once in a while, I did get busted for something, and I think everybody did. And this is, I don't know if they still do it this way, but you sit in a classroom. I'm getting off topic. I'll bring it back in a second. You sit in a classroom, hands on the desk like this, and you have to look straight forward for 45 minutes. That was detention, which from some of my friends' dads who had gone to St. John's before that, they said, oh, that's a hell of a lot better versus when the nuns ran it and they would smack you with a ruler. Like they'd literally actually smack you. I'm like, yeah. But yeah, so hands forward. If you fell asleep, get out of here, come back tomorrow. It's like, if you talk, get out of here, come back tomorrow. And every once in a while they'd have a task that we had to do. So like, hey, so we have to go take the garbage out. We need 2 volunteers. You ever see the movie? What's the one with is it not Neil deGrasse Tyson? I forget his name. It's the movie about in prison. I'm gonna blank on the name of it, but it's a really good movie. It's they're in prison and the movie goes like all the way from the start of his prison to the end of his prison sentence.
No, not ringing a
I'm
bell.
gonna have to remember the movie. I forget the actor's name too. Either way, it reminded me almost of that a little bit. Where like there's guys in the yard all day, and then like every once in a while they get an opportunity to go out like and pick garbage. Like, oh yes, please, me, just because it was more exciting than just sitting there with your eyes straight forward. I'll probably, if my brain's working, we'll think of the movie in about 20 minutes from now, and I'll say it. But yeah, so yeah, St. John's High School, just to kind of paint the picture of where I was at, was all boys, very competitive in sports. So like ice hockey, I was good enough to play freshman year, but not good enough to play after that. Um, they have, to give you also perspective, they have two people, one kid in my class, one kid in the class before me. One of them played on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Was it Steelers? I think so. Blanche Flower. He's St. John's and UMass Amherst. And then Richie Rogers, I believe, played on the Green Bay Packers. I think they just played for one season, but they played. I think they each may have gotten a touchdown or something like that. So it was pretty high level sports at the time, and still is. But yeah. So I did ice hockey, I did crew wrestling, and then I did track. Track I stayed with throughout. The other ones I did like for a year or two here or there. Track I ran the 400. It was kind of like middle of the pack. I did some of the sprinting, but wasn't like built enough to be a sprinter. But the 400 and 800 was sometimes my race, and those are fucking hard races. Is it like you sprint, and then you're like, all right, 3/4 of the lap still to go. Keep sprinting. All right, halfway done. Keep sprinting, and you're just like, I don't know. Mentally, that's a tough race to run because you just got to sprint the whole time, and you're just exhausted. Um, but yeah, high school. Another another piece of a sport that I actually kept throughout most of my life was snowboarding. I got really into snowboarding probably freshman year of high school, maybe even like middle school. Actually, yeah, definitely middle school. And lived near Wachusett Mountain, and got as a kid you can get cheap seasons pass, especially at the time it was like $200 or $300, and like you can go unlimited bronze pass. You can't go on like prime time, which is like Saturday morning. But um, got really into like freestyle snowboarding and started competing in that a little bit. I had a couple friends who like were really really good. Like we started like hitting the terrain park all the time. Like we'd almost treat it like practice. I mean, around here, I know in Vermont they probably have like school ski teams. Maybe they do around here too, but we weren't part of anything like related to the school. We just kind of did our own thing, and we had a team, and we would do some like competitions and stuff like that, and it was really fun. Um, I ended up I probably did that. I still do it, but I ended up doing probably like 5 years of that, getting a little better. My last year I did it, I was starting to get good at backflips and like landing them and like adding that to my like routine for the freestyle. And I over rotated one of them. This is gonna tie in a second. I over rotated one of them with my brother at Mount Snow, and I landed on this shoulder so hard. I remember the very first thought was my shoulder will never be the same ever again. The very like I, like wasn't the first thought wasn't pain. The first thought was my shoulder will never be the same ever again. And some in some ways I'm right, but it's pretty much good to go. I ended up going through a lot of physical therapy in my was it this is actually into college now, but that's all right. I ended up going through a lot of physical therapy. I think it might have been senior year of high school, freshman year of college, somewhere in that time frame. And that's what kind of like exposed me to the physical therapy career in general. Um, and unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, the damage I had on my shoulder was not going to be something that could be fixed conservatively, like through PT. It did require a surgery, and I still would advocate to myself, if I could, looking at it hindsight 2020, to still go down that same path of trying PT for an extended amount of time. I tried it for like maybe 6 months, something like that, and seeing if I could get it better. And my issue was it just kept dislocating. I probably dislocated it like 30 times. Like it would get better, dislocate, get better, and it would be like fully out of socket. Tried to put it back in. I had a complete tear of the labrum. So there's not a ton you can do other than like, all right, let's see if we can strengthen the muscles around it. If that works, great. If not, get surgery to repair it. So I tried the conservative route, didn't end up working out, and I had to get surgery on it. I had a fantastic surgeon, Doctor. Shoot, I haven't thought about his name in a while, so I'm gonna forget that one too. But he's out of Boston Sports and Shoulder. I'm gonna forget his name, unfortunately. But he did the bank art repair and came out great. rehab was like really easy, honestly, comparative like to all the PT I did before it. Um, and and that's kind of what brought me full circle into like, okay, I think this is a career that I might like to go down because I had been exposed to it. Otherwise, I would have really had no idea.
Yeah, that's actually really super interesting that an injury is what helped
Yeah.
inspire something like that. I'm
Yeah.
actually, I've been dealing with for the last couple of years. I pulled a hamstring playing flag football. It was like a cold ass day. Didn't drink enough water. Probably didn't stretch as good as I need to as now I'm getting older. And switching between quarterback and receiver, last play of the game went on a full sprint, just
Oh,
full
that's
pop.
how it
Like,
happens.
and I played football like my whole life. I played baseball. I've never really had a serious injury. I've never pulled a muscle like that. And that was some of the most painful, like,
Oh,
it just hurt so bad. And I immediately went to PT, did that for a little bit. And then it was like, I did that in like in January of 2023. And then it was February Super Bowl weekend. They didn't have enough guys. I was feeling better. I was like, yeah, I can give it a go. I'm
mm,
like, I probably shouldn't, but I'll give it a go. I'm like, guys, I can't run. They're like, everyone's like laughing, ha ha ha. And then I go to chase my, I think it was my cousin playing quarterback, and I'm running, and it's a pop again.
ah,
And ever since that second pop, it's still never been like 100% to
sure.
this day. And I've been to physical therapy 3 separate times,
Ugh,
and this is the best it's felt in years. Like, I've been playing
sure.
football again. I've been running more. Like,
Nice,
and like
nice.
I lift, but I lift conservatively. I don't,
Totally.
and I've kind of switched. I don't lift heavy anymore. I just
Yeah.
lift to be in shape, to
Yeah.
work the muscles. And the more that I've played football this year, the better it's actually gotten.
Good. Yeah.
And I've been pretty good. It's a little sore today. I was squatting yesterday, but like, it's still one of those things. It's just like, I kind of just accept it. And like, I kind of understand now looking at like pro athletes, and I used to play fantasy football. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
why do they always get hamstring injuries? What the hell? They can't just play. And I'm like, nah, that like could end careers. Like, I'm still suffering because it's such a big muscle, and like so hard to like rehab it, and like all the muscles around it, and like your hips, and then your butt, and like your groins and your thigh, and like working all these. It's crazy the amount of stuff that goes into rehabbing muscles, and like I can imagine
Totally.
that experience, or how that experience really influenced you into getting into your career. And if you could like walk me through that college experience, like
Yeah.
how did that path kind of start forming for you as you kind of started rehabbing this injury?
Yeah. Definitely. So I'll put it this way: freshman year, I still was completely undecided. That PT was just like a thing in the back of my head that hadn't really formulated yet. So I was completely undecided my freshman year, and knew I wanted to do something. My dad actually gave me this piece of advice: is like, well, what type of work do you want to do? Do you want to do like office style work? Do you want to like work with your hands? Do you want to like go into the health field? Like, do you want to do like law? Do you like all this other stuff? And I'm like, for whatever reason, I don't know what it was, but I'm like, ugh, I just really want to like be somewhat active and moving during my like day to day job. Um, like the idea of just like desk work just like made me want to vomit. It's like I have to be moving. And just personality wise, I think that's what it was. So in the health, like medical health, fitness, medical, something in that realm was the first thing that I was really thinking about. So I took a couple of gen ed courses. I took a nutrition class. I took a kinesiology class, which is exercise science, and I took did I say nutrition already? I think I did. Well, something else. And the nutrition class I took was the science of like something nutrition. And when I went in there, like the first I canceled after the first day. I'm like, oh, nutrition sounds really cool. Like, eat the healthy foods and like and it was completely chemistry. I'm like, what is this? Like, I hate chemistry. Chemistry was my hardest class in all of college. I think it was my only class I got a C in. It was easily my hardest class. And I sat front row in a lecture hall of like 200 people. And I was like, I could have seen it, and I tried my ass off. Chemistry's hard. um, but it was all chemistry, and I'm like, I can't. There's zero chance I could be in this class. Part of it was probably that specific class I chose, and part of it was probably that specific teacher. Like I could have had a completely different experience if those two things were different, and maybe I would be a nutritionist right now. But that class, one class, and I was done. I'm like, I'm dropping. I think that's still the only class I've ever dropped in college. But I didn't. And then on the absolute flip side, the kinesiology class I took was phenomenal. Great teacher, really riveting. Like, so I don't know if there's a lesson in there. Maybe like if you're interested in something and you don't like the class, or maybe change to a different teacher. Maybe I don't know what the lesson is, but that's the reason I went down that path for more of like the exercise science. I still didn't know what I wanted to do with the actual major yet, because exercise science, like if you talk to a lot of people that have done that major, it's kind of like a catch-all for people who want to do something in the health, fitness, potentially medical industry, but it's almost like majoring in biology. Like you're not gonna work in biology per se when you graduate college, but it's like it gives you a foundation to be able to do things like maybe go to grad school, maybe like pursue a different degree or degree like in something else. Like there's no like strictly like jobs in that per se. Um, for the most part, I might be generalizing, but it is like a bit of a catch-all. So a lot of people graduate kines and they're like, do I go be a trainer? Do I go like try to go down PT school? Do I go I try nutrition? Do I try this? Like, so they really try to help you like along the way with advisors of like, hey, what's your plan after you graduate? Because if you don't have a plan, like you're not really that much better as if you didn't graduate at all, if you didn't go to college. So um and it's tough in many ways because of that. So that I was lucky to have a really good advisor who I don't know if we were talking about this on air or off air at this point, but gave me a little bit of tough love at the time. I went to UMass Amherst for college for undergrad, and the first 2 years were kind of like didn't have a major. I liked to party. I didn't by no means was I a crazy party. I'm like some of the people I knew,
I mean,
but
it had
like
the name Zoomass.
yeah,
Like that was then,
it,
especially then.
I like to have fun, and I did okay. Like I was doing pretty good. I think I had like a 3.1 GPA, but my advisor was like at the point I think it was sophomore year where they're like, "Hey, so you can't be undecided anymore. You got to choose a major." Essentially, my advisor Frank Reif, I remember his name. Uh, Looked at me, looked at my grades. He's like, "So what do you want to do like with your degree?" And he's like, "I'm like, I think I might want to do PT because at the time I was doing physical therapy." He goes, "Okay, right off the bat, your GPA is not good enough at a 3.1 because it's really competitive to get into PT schools." He's like, "You got to get that up." And he goes, "You got to start separating yourself now and start getting internships because they like to see that you're well rounded in internship, and you can't just go to one place and do like 100 hours. You got to go. I'd rather you. I don't know if he said this exactly, but in a theme, he would be like, I'd rather you go to like 100 places and get 1 hour. Like they want to see a lot of different. So that kind of started my transition from going from what do I do to like, okay, let's just deep dive, get the grades up, and go to PT school.
Yeah, that
Get
makes a lot of
relationships. Yeah.
sense because I wish that was something that I was kind of taught more in late high school, early college about the internship stuff.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that goes for like any career coming out of college. Is like and people are experiencing this now, especially with the job market the way it is. Like you'll get the running jokes you get out of college, and then all the places are like, you need 3 to 5 years of experience. It's
yeah.
like getting the experience during your college experience
Mm,
is so vital for success in whatever career you do. Like I don't end up in the career that I have currently if I didn't get internships during my college experience. I was working
sure.
full-time intern, I was commuting, so like I went to UMass Dartmouth.
Nice.
So I'd commute up there, and then if they were starting to transition to more like online stuff too. So I finished a lot of online classes and would just uh, go. I worked at a place in Providence and would just intern there full time basically, and that opened me up to a program after college where I was able to travel and live in Texas for a year, and I lived in Augusta,
Nice.
Georgia for a little bit, and that's where I kind of fell in. I didn't even actually go into this in pre-interview. I usually talk about how I created the podcast, but like when I went to Georgia, it was just like a bad experience, toxic work environment, and that's what led to the creation of the podcast. Where I was like, I'm not doing something that I want to do. Like, what's my thing? And then I eventually created the podcast to kind of give a quick little thing about that.
Yeah.
But those experiences don't happen without doing an internship,
Right.
and they don't like teach that enough. I feel like until you get into those places where you're getting ready to pick a major, or back in high school you're getting ready to pick a like a college. Like this stuff needs to be more pushed,
Mm,
apply for the internships, try to get experience, and nowadays a lot of them do pay. There's
sure,
obviously unpaid ones, and
sure.
those are good experiences as well. But if you obviously need the money, times are tough, you need to pay your bills. There are a lot of internships that do pay, and even if it pays a little bit less, the experience is helping you in the future. So when you need to get those jobs out of college, that you're going to get them. And I think that's a under valued topic that isn't being always talked about, whether it's high school, late high school, and then college, going into getting to picking the majors and undergrad, and if you're going to graduate school and stuff like that. But I think that's a huge piece of it that people kind of don't always acknowledge, is that part.
Yeah.
And where I'd like to go with this is kind of as you pick the major, you're going down this path towards PT. How do you end up to eventually get to, and this is obviously a kind of a big jump, but
Mm,
getting towards creating your own practice?
totally. I want to backtrack for 1 second because there's
Yeah,
one
yeah,
other piece I forgot to mention. Um, when I was undecided my freshman year, I I wasn't even 100% sure I wanted to go down the fitness road until I started getting into the gym because I had played sports throughout high school, but I never honestly I could probably count the number of times on one hand that I actually went to the gym in high school. Like I would just play sports, go to practice, play sports. Go play. I didn't really lift. I don't know. I know a lot of the football players would go lift, but I'm doing track. I just got to run. I don't have to lift. Which now that would me telling myself back in the day that would make me such a better track athlete or you name it. Some of the stuff we had practice lifting, but whatever. Um, where was it going with this? Oh, freshman year of college, I lived on a floor with at the time what was the D1 AA, whatever below the Division 1 um is the football team.
Mm.
And I think my next year or the year after that is when they actually transitioned to the top tier who are they playing this year? I think they're playing Georgia. UMass Amherst is
Yeah,
playing.
they played an SEC school.
Yeah.
I
I
forgot.
think it's
Was it
Georgia.
They played Michigan State
They
recently.
might be
Yeah.
did they get absolutely just demolished?
No, I don't know if I think they won that
Really?
game. Or was that Boston College? That was
That
definitely
might have
Boston
been
College.
that was Boston
That was
College.
Boston
That was
College. Yeah.
I
UMass
believe.
did no, because I do know I play a lot of NCAA.
Yeah.
They do. Who'd they play? Because I did see something about this. I think on
I
TikTok
think it's
too.
Georgia.
Was it
I
Georgia?
think it's Georgia. It might not be, but I'm pretty sure it's
It was a big school. It was a big school. I do remember that.
And I'm looking at it, I'm like, they're gonna get killed. Why do they even agree to this game? But anyway, so at the time
The
I was-
money.
yeah, right. Yeah. At the time, my freshman year, for whatever reason, me and my roommate, who were semi-randomly paired, got put on this floor, the 18th floor of John Adams, which are the skyscraper dorms they have at UMass Amherst, with almost every other single person on our floor was a football player. So for whatever reason, and we formed a really tight knit bond that year with everybody there, and it was really fun. Probably because of that, because they all came into that knowing each other. So it wasn't like everybody was brand new, establishing friendships. Like everybody was already super tight, day one, and then we just kind of grew in with them as well. But anyway, there's this one kid, Jeff, who was a kicker on the football team. Pretty jacked guy, but definitely been working out for a while. And but at Friday, Saturday nights, after a couple beverages, I'd always be like, and this is for some reason that we always like to do this, try to wrestle. Like a bunch of us try to wrestle, and he would fucking kick my ass every single time. And then I was like, fuck you, Jeff. I'm gonna go to the. I've told this before. I'm gonna go to the gym every day for the next 6 weeks. Then I'm gonna kick your ass. He goes, oh, okay. And in my head, that's what I thought it took. It was oh, all I gotta do is get strong for 6 weeks, and then I'll be jacked. And then a slight. Well, I'll wait to say that. Long story short, I went to the gym every day for 6 weeks. Kind of fell in love with it because I'm like, this is really cool. I like the way it feels. I like the routine. He still kicked my ass when I came back, but that's kind of how I got into the whole fitness thing. Was that weird side story of trying to wrestle one of the football kickers at UMass. One other side story on this. I don't know how much truth this has to it, but do you ever take the pre-workout Jacked 3D?
No, I
Have
was.
you heard of it?
Yeah, I have. I was C4. I have lit over there.
Yeah. So there was something in Jacked 3D that they said from the rumors of they took it off the market. The rumors have been said that there's some component in Jacked 3D that's too similar to methamphetamine, or something like
I
that.
feel like I remember that story.
Something
Yeah.
along those lines. But at the time, my freshman year is like when it came out. So everybody at that gym at UMass Amherst was taking Jack 3D, like everybody, and it was the craziest pump, so much energy. Like it's kind of like, I don't know, like I've never done mess around with like hard drugs, but like people were saying like, oh, you never get the same high the first time. Like that's how you felt on this like pre workout. And I joked, I'm like, the reason why I'm work out is because I was addicted addicted to meth while I was working out for 6 weeks. But literally, like you'd work out, then you'd go home, you'd clean your entire dorm, and then like you do all your homework, and then like you just continue the energy. But that was another like funny side story of like why I started working out. I was kind of addicted to it for like 6 weeks, but they took that off the shelves. I think like within like a year.
It's
They pulled
crazy.
it.
Pre-work. I tried to like wean myself off pre-workouts, and like I still use it, or I'm big into using NeuroGum actually.
Okay.
So
Okay.
for me, caffeine does like kind of get me going. Like just
Sure.
even like a cup of coffee or something like that. Like I know some people can build the tolerance, but
Sure. Sure.
like, and for me, I don't get hungry if I have caffeine. It just my hunger's gone.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
sometimes if I don't want to eat, I'll have NeuroGum, but like, it's like
Mm,
I'll instantly feel the boost in caffeine.
sure.
So like in the mornings, if I do like I try to do 5 a.m. workouts before work,
Nice.
and I'll instead of doing like, because my stomach doesn't always handle pre workout in the morning, it's just aggressive, and then coffee. I'm an afternoon coffee drinker. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
a psycho. I don't like morning coffee.
Hey,
Like
I'm drinking it right now. It's 9 o'clock.
I prefer in the afternoons that sweet spot, but in the morning I'll just have NeuroGum, and
Yeah.
that'll get me enough like energized to actually just to work out. So like
Sure. Sure.
I've tried to, because like I noticed over time the more that I use the pre workout, you build the tolerance to it, and it just doesn't do the
Yeah.
same, and that's why you have to take breaks from it. And then it's like, well, I need it because I need that boost to
Yeah.
work out, and it's like creates this addiction almost, and then
Yeah.
your caffeine tolerance is going to build on top of that, and it just creates this whole issue, and all the chemicals that you put in it. I mean, just we can
Totally.
go down a whole rabbit hole with that. I don't want to derail on a
Yeah.
pre workout
Yeah.
conversation.
No, for sure. Like, no, I try to, for the most part, I drink black coffee, so I try to keep it as pure as possible. But yeah, I'm definitely a big caffeine addict, and luckily it's well, somewhat semi biased. But there's tons of studies that come out like, oh, caffeine's like it's not that bad for you. Actually, if you drink it, like it extend your life. Well, I don't know. You've seen probably some of the
It's like
studies.
there's
Yeah.
for every negative story, there's like a positive one
Yeah.
out there
Yeah.
too. So
I do think, again, not to get too off track, but I do think there probably will be more studies coming out at some point about how taking too much caffeine will probably have some sort of effect on your, and there might be some already. I just haven't seen them. Sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, because obviously if you are stimulating the adrenals all day, then you probably aren't getting enough parasympathetic activity in your body, which is the rest, digest, recover type stuff. So I'm sure there is going to be some of that at some point. That might be a hard thing to study, but that's some of the drawbacks I've heard when some people, and again, I'm biased, I drink coffee all day, but some of the drawbacks, people saying like cut back your caffeine, cut back some of that stuff, because then you will get better recovery, you'll get better parasympathetic, which makes sense to me. But for now, I like it.
yeah, it's hard to get off it, because
Yeah.
like as soon as you get off, it's like, damn, I need fucking coffee. Like,
Yeah.
'cause
Yeah.
it's also part of an addiction to it, where it's like
Sure.
it's a drug. Caffeine's a
Sure.
drug, so there's an
Sure.
aspect of that to it.
Sure.
To get back on
Yes.
to creating your business, like how do we
Yes.
get there?
Yeah. So um that's a good story. So when I graduated PT school, I started working at, actually even before I interned with them, but I started working at Performance Physical Therapy, now called High Bar. And
That's where I went.
yeah, have you heard
Yeah,
High Bar?
yeah, I've been there. That's what I did for
Yeah.
my hamstring.
Yeah.
Wampanoag Trail is where I was going and stuff
Okay.
like that.
Yeah, I was working at the Pawtucket location, living in Newport at the time, driving to Pawtucket. Funny enough, now I live in Providence and I drive to Portsmouth, so my truck just loves just racking up miles. Just like shameless plug for Toyota Tacoma, please pay me, because I'm at 228,000 miles on it. So racking those up, hoping to hit 300,000. Anyway, I was working at Pawtucket in a big PT clinic. I think we had at any given time like between 5 to 7 clinicians, which means PT and or PTA. So a ton of PTs working there. Huge facility. I learned probably more there in because I worked there for 2 years. I learned probably more there in 2 years than I did like at school. Like it was I might forget the numbers, like 1,000 different evaluations and like 5,000 different treatments. I was able to print off like my sheet like after I left. But it was a really good experience. But it's something that and I got to mention that I had incredible mentors there. I had really good mentors from Andrew and Brian, and they taught me so much. Both super knowledgeable in their own way. Um, so it was a really good experience. I've definitely talked to people who have worked in similar clinics to that, and like they're like, this sucked. This, and there's reasons why people end up leaving long term. Um, One of them is the stereotype of that these types of the big box standard insurance based model clinics are they get the kind of like slang terms of like a PT factory for many reasons, where like one clinician from a PT standpoint might be seeing like two, three, four people in 1 hour, which is tough to give each person the appropriate care, especially if it's like maybe a complicated case, or like you're trying to establish rapport, or you're trying to like figure out the proper progressions to make. Um, the analogy I've used many times is like it kind of feels like, I don't know if you're ever a waiter, but I was a waiter for a little bit at Olive Garden, and they just crush us with like multiple tables at once, and it can be almost feel like the same thing where you're a PT and you're going from table to table, and you're trying to like soup salad breadsticks to like each table. So long story short, I felt like there was a lot being left on the table from a ability to give high quality care to each client. Now, I wasn't thinking those thoughts up on my own either. There was a lot of PTs around the same time that were saying like, "Hey, like there is a better way to do this if people will see the value and will pay for it, then it will work." So there's a PT in Newport who was doing the same thing, crushing it. There's a couple PTs across the country that were doing the same thing, who were leaving some of their big box clinic and becoming solo practitioners, and then not accepting insurance at all. And there's different ways and variations to do that where it works out mutually for the clinician and the patient or client. Because obviously you're like, why would I go see a clinic that doesn't take my insurance at all? Like, why would I just go to some? Well, there is ways, like if you can space out the appointments a little longer, if you can see the person for a longer amount of time, and if you're seeing someone who really establishes value with the specialty that you need. For example, there's a guy in Rhode Island who's crushing it with golfers. He's the golf PT, and that's all he sees, and that's all he wants to see, and that's where he just crushes it with. So if you're a person with a golf injury, you could go to a big box PT clinic and you know use your however many visits the insurance gives you, like 6 visits, 10 visits, 20 visits, maybe if you're lucky. Maybe have a really low copay, maybe pay like $20, or maybe have a really high copay, pay like $75 or more. You might have a high deductible. You may have to pay like the full price, which would probably be somewhere around $200 a visit versus or until you hit the deductible of like 2,000, sometimes 3,000, maybe even higher. So in other words, it might be out of pocket anyway, in some circumstances. So you run the risk of going to see someone who doesn't really know your specialty in the big box clinic, but also maybe just not getting enough care because you're sharing that time with the clinician with like 3 to 4 of the clients at the same time. You're getting kind of like a rush to like, I just got to get you in and out type of care. So long, all that to say, big box clinics need to exist. They're important, but for some people that either have a specialty need or a high value on something different, that's where some of the smaller solo practitioner, non insurance based clinics have a place. So we've kind of found, and a lot of this is because of the healthcare system in general, where the more reimbursements rates go down from the insurance companies, whether they're Blue Cross Blue Shield, Medicare, United Healthcare, if the insurance rates go down, in order for the big box clinics to keep the lights on at the end of the day, they have to get more people in the door. It's just a volume game. Like if we can get 200 people in today, then we can make like overhead. Not that they're being greedy, but we have to make enough to like not run at least a little bit of a profit or break even. Versus if you don't get enough, then so there's more expenses that go along with that. So the healthcare system is a big reason that these two different things have to exist. Not to say like I don't know what the right answer is. Like, and not to get on a completely different topic, whether like universal socialized healthcare is the answer, or like more of like a system that, well, I don't think anyone would agree the system we have now is the answer, but a mutation of the system we have now might be the answer. But at the end of the day, that's why there's these different, and you're seeing it with primary care offices too. You're seeing like the concierge VIP style primary care is popping up for people that are like, I see my primary care for 5 minutes. I can't even get in. Like the copay is crazy. Like I might as well just see someone who cares, takes the time with me, and gives me a better quality treatment. So that's what I decided to do. There's a lot of people doing it. They seem to be crushing it. I decided to really like double down. Like, hey, I'm the fitness CrossFit PT. That's what I have my passions in. That's what I've been doing for a while. And I know how to help those people. I know how to coach them from a fitness standpoint, but I also know how to help them from a rehab standpoint because I know the sport. Um, and that's what I ended up doing in 2017. Sorry to be long winded. In 2017, I put I think at the time they were requesting like a month notice, little longer than 2 weeks, because it can be tough in a position like that to offload patients to another person's schedule. So in the PT world, 2 weeks notice really doesn't exist. You need a longer time than that. But so I put in my notice and decided to go down the route of open my own business. I guess flashback maybe a few months before that, I was a gym I was working out of for a CrossFit, and the gym owner Dan had approached me and was like, "Hey, like you're a PT. Like, have you ever thought about opening up as a PT in a gym?" Which at the time was starting to get popular, not too crazy. Right now, it's crazy popular. Most gyms have PTs in them, which is pretty wild. That are doing like similar things to me. Like, hey, I just need someone to take a look at something. There's a PT here, perfect. Um, but at the time, it was kind of like, oh, I don't know, like that's kind of, I have to kind of take a leap, a little bit of a risk. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. The guy I mentioned earlier, Kelly Surrett, who's like the kind of like the model PT for like CrossFitters, was doing the same thing. I'm like, maybe I can be like him. Maybe I can do something similar or along that same vein. And so I did it. I opened up within his CrossFit gym, started seeing clients just slowly. Um, Before I saw my first client, though, I wanted to make sure I left the job I was at because I didn't want there to be any issues where what they saw what I was doing was in direct issue with what they had going on for like their policies. I didn't want there to be any competition. In other words, not that I think there was gonna be, but I didn't want any questions about it. So I left them. I picked up a side job in home care PT, which is basically you're working with typically people in the Medicare age, so 65 plus. More often than not, it's like 70, 80, 90. I had one lady who was 102. You go to their houses, you work with them for balance exercises, you work with them on like strength to like help them get out of bed, like that type of PT. Very, very different field, very rewarding, but very different. I actually really enjoyed it, but I knew that wasn't what I was driven to do long term as a specialty. But I did actually enjoy my time doing that. It was really, really interesting, and I got a lot out of it. But I did that part time. No, I did that full time as I was thinking it was going to be part time, but I did that full time as I was building up my business part time, and it was just slow growth. It was just word of mouth, people kind of figuring out what this whole system was, how it was different, what the benefits of it were, and it still is that, and just basically like becoming a part of the communities I was in, people learning about it, knowing about it, um, because the biggest thing with owning a business is, well, I shouldn't say the biggest, a big thing about owning a business is sales and marketing and getting people in the door. The common term with like at least the business groups that I'm in is like it like the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. Like if you build a PT clinic, they'll come. They're not going to come. You have to use your marketing and get the people to understand what's going on, how your value is, and then they will buy into what's going on and get the service they desire that they need. So um, that's kind of, well, long winded explanation of kind of like how I got into it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I like that you took the risk to do it though. Like
Yeah.
anything worth creating starts with that risk.
Mm.
And I like what you just said there too about how the classic kind of marketing thing there is like you build it, they'll come, and this goes for almost any type of creation, is like, just because you build it doesn't mean they'll come. Like,
Right.
you actually have to go out of your way to market yourself, especially now in 2024 with social media the way it is and brands the way they are. Like, it's really contingent on you for putting it out there, creating the content and sharing it with others and talking to people. Like, when I created this book, like, I knew that I had to be the one to promote it. Like, no one's just gonna promote it for me. And I've actually had a lot of people share it and stuff like that, which has been really great. But that's because I also created this podcast and created a network to then launch a book. Like, it started somewhere, and it was all me believing in me and getting people to buy into what I do. Because if you don't believe, no one else is gonna believe in you. Because
Yeah.
why should they? Like, if you don't even believe, why the hell should some random person or even your family believe in what you're doing if you don't feel confident in it? And it stems from that place where you have to take the risk, because there's a
Yeah.
risk starting something new, anything new, whether it's a business, a new job, going to a new school, starting a new relationship. Everything comes with a risk, but there's always typically a reward
Yeah.
with doing the thing.
Yeah.
So it's up to you whether you take on that task and do it. And it sounds like you've taken that risk, and it's ultimately been a huge success for you in building your own business, and you're your own boss and in a place and a specialty that you actually value and desire. And you've picked up stuff along the way that helped contributed to where you are currently. And that's like a huge thing. I mean, everything that I think about in my life might not have gone the way that I wanted it to,
Mm.
but it happened for a reason to get me to where I needed to be. And I'm very big into, like, I don't like to say religious, but spirituality. And
Sure.
I don't say God or anything like that. I say, like, maybe universe or source to be more general.
Mhm.
But when you're kind of tapped into, like, your path or your purpose, it you feel it, like, in a
Mm.
certain way. It's weird, like, there's not so much like a description to it, but like, you just know when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And it seems like, for what you're on, it seems like you're kind of on that path. You're going down
Yeah.
this path, and you're just trusting and believing in yourself to do the thing that you feel like you're called to do.
Right.
And like you said earlier in the podcast, I mean, the fact that I found you on social media, you might be doing the right thing. And I could say the same thing about having another fantastic guest like yourself to come on the podcast. Is
Mm.
I think I might be doing the right thing by having this podcast every week and growing it every single year to meet another person that we're connecting on the same level, and we both do a podcast. That's kind of how
Yeah.
we initially connected. But like, to hear about your journey into PT, the journey into owning a business. Like, it's super valuable to hear these things and document these things and share this with people, because we all come from different places, but have similar mindsets and values and beliefs if you actually start digging into those things. And I think it's such a interesting point after hearing you kind of talk about how you got into PT.
Yeah. I like that you brought that up too about risk, because like as a profession, if someone is drawn to the PT profession, by definition, that's more of a conservative treatment versus surgery. Um, for the most part. But because of that, most PTs on the what's the name of the scale? The risk scale, like how willing they are to take risks, are usually extremely conservative. Probably similar with like you said you're in accounting, right?
Yeah.
Accountants probably are on that same
Yeah,
same level
yeah.
scale. Like, we're not, people who are like maybe in sales are probably like a much
They
higher.
want to take more risk. Yeah.
So we're naturally, for the most part, to generalize, very like risk adverse. So it's tough, I think, for a lot of times. Like it was tough for me. I should put it that way. To make that leap of faith. But I think I have a business coach, which helps. I think that's especially for someone who got zero business training in school. It was 100% like anatomy, physiology. But it's helpful to be like, hey, am I doing this right? Like, am I spinning my wheels and doing this completely wrong, or should I do the right thing? And I think you have to be careful down that road too, because there's a lot of people who are just like, yeah, I'm a coach, I'll take your money. But it's like, finding someone who you trust is obviously very important. And a community that you trust with other like-minded, in my case, like-minded PTs. But yeah, the one thing that the coach kind of more asking questions to help me kind of like overcome that first barrier was like, okay, in a worst case scenario, what is I mean, you might have heard this before. In the worst case scenario, if you're taking a risk like this, like, what's the worst thing that could happen? And if you look at what the worst case I could think could happen, and you're like, well, I could overcome that. Like, I might waste a little time, waste a little money, but I'll be okay. It's like, And if the reward of that is pretty good and you want to go down that and get that reward, it's like, maybe this is something you should worth taking a risk for. So for example, for me, getting into the business is, okay, the risk, I quit my job, I open the business, I spend a little bit of money, I spend a ton of time and effort. 6 months down the road, I go bankrupt. What's the worst thing that happened? Well, I lost some money, I lost some time. Just go get another PC job, I guess. He's like, yeah, it's not that bad. It's not like I'm in a job where, especially in the PT field, it's and especially at the time, it's like this is kind of easy. If I need to get another job, I can. I know not every profession is like that, but for the PT field, it's like a nursing field. It's like you can get a job in any hospital. It's okay. It'll be okay. So that was one thing that was like, okay, I have that safety net in the back of my mind. It's like it's a risk, and I've established that it's a calculated risk, and I'm willing to take that risk. So it was very much like a thought process for me of like, all right, I can, and it was very nerve wracking to make that jump, but kind of going through some of those thought experiments and like and figuring things out. I'm like, okay, let's do it. Let's make this happen. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
key to do that thought
Yeah.
experiment though, because not everybody does it. Like
Yeah.
you have to, I'm very big on planning and like thinking things through and
Mhm.
having that kind of outlined. And if you don't take those necessary steps to like do the research and figure things out a little bit,
Yeah.
because I was joking about like towards the end, and I'll have that question for you at the end.
Yeah.
How people just say, just do it,
Yeah.
or like just jump, or people just jump in the water. You'll
Yeah.
eventually learn how to swim. Like
What
no,
if
the
there's a
negative.
rock under there?
There's a very good chance that you could jump in and drown. Like
Yeah.
don't do that. Like
Yeah.
actually research. Like when they say just jump in, it's more to like start the thing. Like you have
Yeah.
to just start. Like
Right.
and I think a planned start is better, but it's still the starting that's the most important aspect to it. But
Right.
too many
Right.
people get caught up in the timing of it just isn't right,
Right.
and
Right.
you can't let that affect you. Like
Mhm.
things take time. For
Mhm.
most people, it's very rare that you're going to start something and get super successful. And typically, when those things happen,
They burn
burn out
out,
really
or
quickly,
yeah,
and
they don't last.
it's not gonna be something you really want. You might
Yeah.
get the wrong attention for blowing up on some stupid thing on, especially on social media.
Yeah.
You never
Yeah.
really know where that could go. So good things take time,
Yep.
and you just gotta let things be, but
Yeah.
also apply the work. It's a very fine line of letting things be, but also working really hard. Because
Totally.
like if you know things are gonna work out and you just believe in yourself, and if you have a faith, believe in that and trust in that, that you're doing the right thing, you're helping people, you're helping yourself, things are going to work out. You just got
Yeah.
to know that they're going to work out. And it's a big mindset shift to have. But once you can have that shift and think more positively about what you're doing and how it's affecting people, I think that's going to lead to more success versus like constantly worrying about the next thing. And that's easy for, I guess, maybe me to speak in a situation that I have. I might be more privileged than someone else. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to a mindset of like where you see yourself and how you see the world. And a lot of people do carry a victim mindset with
Mm.
their careers, with their lifestyles, and it goes back to the comment I was talking about of like stereotypes. Like you, at the end of the day, you're controlling your mind and what you think and what you want to be. Like obviously, there's gonna be outside influences from the environment, but at the end of the day, it's you. Like
Yeah.
you have to decide to do the thing, and I think that's really important when we're talking about starting a business or starting
Yeah.
a podcast or starting a YouTube channel or creating any type of content or business. It's just very important to do that. We are getting towards the end of the
Cool.
podcast, but did you want to talk about the podcast at all a little bit? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll dive in that really quick, because then we'll start
Um,
wrapping it up.
so yeah, the podcast 2021. Another thing that had been in the back of my mind. There was a podcast that I loved listening to throughout PT school called the Barbell Shrugs podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard of that
No, I
one.
haven't. No.
It's a big fitness,
Yeah.
big fitness slash like CrossFit style podcast. But to paint a picture, it was 3 or 4 guys from Tennessee. Each one had their own like separate kind of like personality, and they all had like their southern accents, but they're all like really, really sharp. Not to say that southern accents shouldn't make you sharp. Probably shouldn't have had those back to back. Southern people are smart. But they would go and have this mobile podcast where they would go to these different gyms and interview. Started with gym owners like that were very close to them, but then they would like fly to California. They would fly to like Alaska. They would go to like France. Like the podcast got big enough where they could like all of them would travel and go to these different places and podcast with, and the camera work was unbelievable. Like they would work out with the people before the podcast. I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. And they were always so like, I didn't miss an episode. There's one thing they did that I wish I had the consistency to do, was they posted and this could be the game changer. I don't know if you do this, but they posted every Wednesday, and I don't know how they'd be able to do that. They don't. They all of those guys that did it originally have no longer do it, and it's a different group, and I just don't connect with the new group as much. But during that period of time when they did it, was awesome. Every Wednesday I was excited, looking forward to that new episode of whatever they had, and I just put it on, like meal prep, doing dishes, like whatever. But yeah, so that like really fired me up. There was a couple other I was listening to at the time. This guy John North, who was an Olympic weightlifter, who had like these solo podcasts. He had a guest on once in a while, but he would just chug coffee, and just ramble. And I'm like, and that's kind of like almost what we were talking about initially, like the bro style podcast. But it really wasn't, because it was like he would talk about weightlifting pretty much the entire time. He'd go off subject, but they were always just, his brain is just fascinating. So those are the two that really like inspired me. And my business coach at the time was like, hey, like if you're into this, like as a consumer, it is also a good idea for like, business marketing, growing your brand, to like have a podcast. Like if it's something, because it's a lot of work, which we both know, if it's something that you're interested in, like pursuing the work for it, it's could be mutually beneficial, like as a business aspect as well. I'm like, all right, like I thought it over. Like I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it or not, because I guess we said podcasts were blowing up at the time, and I'm like, give it a shot. Start with the Blue Yeti mic. I know you mentioned USB mics. I don't know if you started
Yeah,
the
the
same
Yeti.
thing. I had a Blue Yeti mic plugged into my laptop, had GarageBand and no video, and that was it for the first few episodes. And I just kept doing it, and it was fun. So like that's pretty much just like how I ended up getting started with it.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things. It's like, I think if you're willing to and want to, I think podcasts are great. Like it doesn't
Yeah,
matter what space you end up into, but the key part is ending up in a space. Like
sure.
don't be one of the podcasts where we talk about like the broies, just random talk about nothing, nothing that matters. Like there's a space for that, but I personally just don't enjoy those because like I look for more
Yeah,
of a purpose to get out of something. If I'm watching it, whether it is a comedic like style to it,
sure,
or
sure.
if I'm looking for some type of educational purpose, or maybe it's a political aspect I want to hear something on, like make sure you find your niche if you're going to podcast. But I think it's super valuable. The life lessons and like the relationships that I've been able to establish from podcasting, unmatched. Like, I mean,
Yes.
even this, like, who knows if we ever meet, if we both neither do a podcast. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know if we have the chance to meet. I mean, social media is weird and we might end up in the same place, but to have the conversation, like, we don't get the chance without podcasting. And
Right.
it's like, I've always said this, it taps into this like primitive aspect of like storytelling. And we get to
Yeah.
kind of relive that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like obviously there's cameras and all this stuff, but like we're we're turning back the clocks essentially. It's almost like sitting by campfires and just talking. Like we're
Yeah.
not on our phones, we're just here
I
talking
never
about
thought
our
about it like
lives.
that.
Yeah, and I've always looked at it like that. It's like it's really primitive storytelling. Like
Yeah.
because if you're doing it the traditional model, like I was kind of talking about earlier, like a Joe Rogan style,
Mhm.
like where it's just two people or could be a few people, just some cameras and no like real technology. Obviously, he has Jamie and stuff, but like that is like going back to like the more primitive aspect of storytelling and conversations before like phones and stuff were introduced. Because now, like
Yeah.
obviously, we have that and we could fact check and do all this random shit while we're talking, and it's
Right.
beneficial, but it's different. Like when we're just talking about our lives and actually like having a conversation versus like if you're in a bar or something, like you might not get as deep as we've gotten on a podcast.
Yeah.
And there's that difference that I think podcasting allows the opportunity for. And I think it's just a unique thing. And I always encourage people if they're interested, it's worth trying. You might not make it past 10 if you
Yeah.
don't have a
Yeah.
niche, but I think it's worth a try because I think it adds like this different like life experience that you get. And it's also different. Obviously, hosting a podcast is very different than being a guest on a podcast. I've been on a
Yeah.
guest on a few podcasts, and um, it's a unique experience. And I like to like
Totally.
offer that to people that might not have big social medias and stuff like that to sit in a chair and talk about what they do and their life story. And I think that's kind of the approach that I've taken, and I like the way that you do your podcast, and it's different than mine. And I think that's like the cool thing is that we both do podcasts, and it's going towards like a similar purpose of trying to like educate and help people, but within our own spaces. And I think that's the value of podcasting. And there's no one way to do it. it's really how you want to do it, but as long as it's with a purpose and with passion behind it,
Yeah.
I always think it's like super valuable.
Yeah, I like that. I think you touched on a good point there, which is like that campfire, like human interaction that like and it's funny you say that because now that you're saying that, I remember it that someone early on in my podcast is like, I'm sorry, early on was like, wow, I like that was super cool. Like, when would I ever have a chance to be able to like speak to someone like that? Like normally, like at a campfire, maybe like, but like probably a lot of people aren't going having a campfire and telling like stories like that. So it's an incredibly unique experience. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and it's definitely just interesting, and um, just to kind of start bringing things home. I
Yeah.
just like I appreciate you for doing this podcast for
Mhm.
one. I appreciate the fact that you do a podcast. Like I think that's just a cool thing, and having your own business and working in BET, I think it's a great benefit to society to be able to do that and be able to take the risk. And as you've talked about, there's like a lot of things that go into that, and seems like that you've been really successful with doing that. And I wish you tons of continued success with doing that. I've
Thank
had
you.
a great time on the podcast with you. I do have the one more question for you, but
Sure.
I feel like that was important to kind of just say.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that we were able to kind of like do this and walk through your life story here. But Matt, the last question I do have for you would be, what is your advice for someone that wants to pursue their passion?
Yeah, it's you quickly prepped me on this before, but I didn't really get a chance to think about it. Um, let's see. So I'm gonna try to narrow it down to maybe like PT. Um, and then I'll try to expand from there. So I might have to like talk through this a little bit. Um, I guess what comes to mind is like if someone came to me and they said, "Hey, I really want to do PT." I think this is actually probably a pretty good example because the PT profession, like probably many other professions, has its pros and cons. A lot of the cons is why I ended up going and creating my own business. But so if someone and a lot of the pros are kind of why I got into the field, which is you know an active style lifestyle and being able to help people and an interest in the health and fitness and medical style field. So I think there's like a small lesson in each one of those. So kind of kind of wrap it all up together. So if someone is looking to pursue their passion, I think what we talked about earlier with the risk analysis is kind of similar here to like explore the different options and explore what the pros, the cons, and maybe the risks of it, and really just like either I don't know if you write it on paper, journal it, talk to different people, research it, um, kind of explore the ins and outs of it. Not to say you should like let an over analysis stop you because like you said, starting is kind of really where you're gonna learn the most about it. You just got to do it. Not to use the phrase again, but you just starting will create the most learning possible. But I think prepping, doing research, talking to people about whatever it is. And the reason I mentioned that with PT is because um, I wish I actually had done. I don't regret the decision I made, but I wish I had done more research on what the PT field entails before I got into it. Meaning, what does starting salary look like? What do student loans look like? Because that is probably those two factors together are probably the biggest issue in the PT field. Is that the amount of schooling it takes, which is 4 years of undergrad plus 3 years of grad school, 7 years, the accumulated loans versus a starting salary is like, oh damn, I'm gonna have loans for the rest of my life. Like so, and it's not something I considered until I was like halfway through PT school. I'm like, well, I'm already in this. Like, let's keep it rolling. Not that I didn't want to do it because I had a passion for it, but it's like, what if I was kind of on the edge? Like, would I just quit right now? Like, so it's something I think that's like, money is a thing, and loans are a thing. So definitely look into those and see if does this make sense for me with what I want to do, with where my passions lie. So I kind of just like trying to uncover every rock that you can, and like you're gonna miss some things, but do your diligence and in preparation beforehand to make the most educated decision that you possibly can. But in the same vein, not let paralysis by analysis like hold you back. Do your research and then start and then kind of see where it goes.
Perfect. I think that's great advice for someone to take, because it's those two factors of like not the overanalysis stopping you, but also making sure you do research and then
Yeah.
start. Like at the end of the day, you must start, but it's always better to
wing it.
have some, not winging it and having some research behind it. But Matt, I appreciate you for coming on this podcast. This is definitely one of the longer podcasts, if not the longest podcast that I've ever done.
Well, that's what happens when you get two podcasters on
Yeah,
a podcast.
every time I ever do a podcast with other podcasters, it goes on for hours because we're certified yappers. That's what it is. But I've had a blast on this
Yeah,
podcast with you
yeah.
and just kind of just brainstorming, sharing ideas even off podcasts about why you do what you do and what I do, why I do what I do, and just the differences in it. And I think it's always great to get two people that do similar things but in different spaces together on a podcast. And again, I just appreciate you for doing this.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. If you want, just look in this camera and plug all your business and podcasts and stuff.
Yes, podcast is the Rhody Strength Podcast. I believe on Instagram it's at Rhody Strength Podcast. I was somehow able to secure that name, which actually not too many people are probably trying to get that. So yeah, Rhody Strength Podcast on Instagram. I'm also Strength and Sport on Instagram for the PT business, strengthandsportpt.com website. And then you can also find my personal page. I'm public, Matt Sweeney DPT on Instagram as well. I think that's all of them. If you're in the area, you can stop by and say hello. I'm out of Rhody Strength Gym in Providence, and I'm out of Bullfrog Fit Gym in Portsmouth, Rhode Island.
Perfect. For you guys, if you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your grandma. Check it out, thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you'd like to watch your podcast, go on YouTube, search Jared M. Carroll or The Carroll Connection, and it should pop up for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at The Carroll Connection. We'll set that up. And now that the book is released, 5 Pillars to Create a Meaningful Life, available on Amazon right now. Go check it out. Go buy it. Write a review. All that would be heavily appreciated. And until next time, guys, peace.